September 8, 1914. Robert Bartlett is standing in the chart room of the Bear when the lookout sees a schooner ahead, running before the wind. The glasses come up. The schooner is the King and Winge. In Bartlett's 1916 account, he watches her draw closer and begins searching the deck for faces. He sees Monroe, McKinley, Chafe, Karluk, Karluk, and Mugpee. Bartlett's English account groups them as the Eskimo family. The names matter because the survival story had already begun turning them into a category. A boat is lowered from the Bear. Bartlett crosses over, steps aboard, and asks the only question left. "All of you here?" The answer is no. 14 people had come off Wrangel Island, but that number is the wrong place to begin. When the Karluk finally sank, 25 people were left standing on sea ice in the Chukchi Sea, about 60 miles northeast of Wrangel Island. 11 would be dead before the survivors reached the rescue deck. The public story usually turns here, toward Bartlett and the long journey he made with the Inupiaq hunter Kataktovik across the ice in the Siberian coast. That march was real. It saved lives. But before Bartlett found the King and Winge, before Wrangel Island, before the sinking, there was a ship held in ice off northern Alaska, and there was a departure from that ship. The question is not simply whether Vilhjalmur Stefansson abandoned the Karluk. The harder question is what his departure did to the people who remained aboard. The Canadian Arctic expedition began as a project of maps, science, and sovereignty. Canada had taken over an expedition first planned with American institutional support because the Arctic still contained political possibility. New land, if found north of the Beaufort Sea, could become a national claim. Existing coastlines and communities could be surveyed, named, cataloged, and carried south into government files. The expedition split into two parties. The Southern Party, under Rudolf Anderson, would study geography, wildlife, and the people of the Western Arctic. The Northern Party, under Stefansson, would search north and west for land that some scientists still thought might exist. The flagship was the Karluk. Put her on screen beside Nansen's Fram, and the difference is visible before the argument begins. Fram had been built to be held by ice and lifted by pressure. Karluk was an old whaler. Bartlett later wrote that she did not have the strength to sustain heavy ice pressure or the engine power to force loose ice. That comparison is not neutral. Bartlett was defending his own decisions when he wrote it. But the ship's weakness matters because the mission contained two possible futures. One future was a coastal base. Supplies landed, scientific parties moving outward from shore. The other future was adrift. On a map, the second future begins as a short line. The ship is caught near the Alaskan coast. The line moves a little west, then a little more. Then the line is no longer a delay, it is the expedition. Later scholarship, especially Janice Cavell's reassessment, argues that the drift was not only weather-imposed on a helpless plan. Stefansson and Bartlett both understood that an Arctic drift could produce geographical discoveries. The danger was not that no one aboard understood the idea of drift. The danger was that not everyone aboard had been told what accepting that risk might cost. The fatal assumption was plain enough to draw as a diagram. Stefansson could leave an icebound ship for a shore trip, call the absence temporary, and still expect the expedition's authority to remain intact behind him. In plain terms, one man could step off the ship, and the people left on the ship were expected to behave as if nothing essential had moved. That assumption did not have to look sinister on the day it happened. The Karluk was still near the Alaskan coast. Fresh meat mattered. The ship carried Inuit hunters whose knowledge made hunting possible. A party going ashore for caribou could be described as practical, not dramatic. Now put the same scene on the ice. The ship is fixed. The coast is out there, but the ice between ship and shore is not a road. Snow can erase a trail in an hour. A pressure ridge can rise where flat ice had been. A lead can open across yesterday's path. If the ship moves, the ship is not waiting anymore. Bartlett's public account gives us Stefansson's written instructions. The shore party expected to make land near the Jones Islands, cross toward Beachy Point if the ice allowed, hunt caribou, and perhaps buy fish from local people. If the Karluk moved, Bartlett was to set beacons telling where the ship had gone. If no accident happened, the party expected to return in about 10 days. The letter is practical. It names beacons. It names sowing. It names soundings. It names surveying. It names the expected return. It does not name the transfer of command if the ship is carried beyond reach. That silence is too important to treat as harmless. Written orders are where an expedition turns uncertainty into procedure. Here, the procedure covers how to leave messages on the ice. It does not cover what happens if the leader and the ship no longer share the same geography. No surviving transcript tells us what Stefansson and Bartlett said to one another before the party left. We do not know whether Bartlett objected, whether Stefansson brushed the danger aside, whether both men minimized it, or whether each heard the version he needed. The popular version says Stefansson went hunting and the ship drifted away. The record says something narrower and more uncomfortable. Stefansson left written instructions for a temporary absence, and those instructions already imagined the ship moving. Movement was not outside the document. Movement was inside it. On 20th September 1913, according to Bartlett's account, Stefansson and his party left the Karluk. Soon afterward, the weather changed. By 23rd September, the ice was moving. Bartlett had gear hauled back from the ice onto the ship. The wind rose. Snow filled the air. The Karluk began to drift west. This is the recurring image of the episode, a red line sliding across an Arctic chart. At first, the line hugs the north coast of Alaska. Then it bends away. Then it keeps going. The ship is no longer trying to reach a base. The ship has become a camp with a hull under it, trapped inside a current no rank can command. Inside that camp, life narrowed to work that could still be done. Soundings were made. Observations continued. Men hunted when they could. The names in the European accounts usually pull the camera towards Stefansson and Bartlett, but the survival work does not fit inside those two names. The spellings shift across the English record. Here, Karluk names the seamstress rendered in some sources as Karluk or Kuruk. Karluk names the hunter also rendered as Kudrillo. Karluk and Kataktovik hunted. Karluk, often called Auntie in English accounts, made and repaired the skin clothing that kept bodies moving on sea ice. Her daughters Karluk and Mugpi survived with her. In Stefansson's written instructions, Karluk almost disappears into a task, sewing deerskin boots. On the ice, that line was not background. It was whether feet could keep moving. The colonial record still limits the frame. Most surviving pages were written by white officers, scientists, and later authors. We do not have Karluk's full account of what she saw. We do not have Kataktovik's diary of the march to Siberia. The archive records indigenous skill more often than indigenous judgment. That gap is not a reason to leave them out. It is a reason to say what the archive did. By late autumn, the Karluk had become an ice station. The men could still make entries, take readings, move supplies, and wait. But a ship caught in pressure is also a body under force. The hull creaks, timbers take strain. The ice does not need to hurry. On $10 January 1914, the ice fatally nipped the Karluk. On 11th January, she sank in 38 fathoms of water, roughly 60 miles northeast of Wrangel Island. Bartlett's public version gives the scene a shape readers could remember. The Victrola playing Chopin's funeral march, the Canadian ensign still visible, the captain stepping from the sinking ship onto the ice. That image belongs to a memoir published 2 years after the event and shaped for readers. The harder core is the diary page reproduced inside the book. In the afternoon, the ship began to settle. At 4 o'clock, she disappeared in the 38 fathoms. The cinematic version is the memoir. The usable record is the line that gives the time, the depth, and the disappearance. Now the camera should stop on the ice. 25 people, saved supplies, dogs, sledges, a ship's cat, no ship. Their camp was called Shipwreck Camp because there was no need for poetry. The name said exactly what had happened. The next mistake did not belong only to Stefansson. It belonged to the map in front of the people still alive. Bartlett believed the visible land was Wrangel Island, the larger refuge. Cavell's 2025 study, built around unpublished and conflicting primary accounts, argues that this was a crucial error. The land was, or included, Wrangel Island. Malek's calculations complicated the assumption, but later public accounts blurred the uncertainty. What looked like a root problem became a death problem. Bartlett chose to move people toward land, but the party did not move as one disciplined body. An advance group under First Officer Alexander Anderson went out. They ended up on Wrangel Island. Their bodies were not found until 1924. Then the Mackay, Murray, Bouchat, and Morris party decided to leave the main camp on its own initiative. The letter they handed Bartlett is one of the coldest documents in the case. They asked for supplies and equipment. They declared that the journey was their own decision and absolved Bartlett of responsibility. On screen, this is not a speech. It is a list. Pemmican, biscuit, malted milk, sugar, tea, cocoa, chocolate, oil, alcohol, a Primus stove, one rifle, ammunition, a tracing of Wrangel Island from the chart. 50 days. 50 days sounds generous until the map begins moving under it. The Mackay party disappeared. No bodies were found. The Anderson party died on Harold Island. Other men struggled across pressure ridges toward Wrangel. The survivors who reached the island did not reach safety in any easy sense. They reached land, limited game, limited strength, and months still between themselves and rescue. At this point, the story often changes into a clean rescue epic. Bartlett sees that the weakened party cannot all attempt the crossing to Siberia. He chooses Kataktovik to go with him. They leave Wrangel Island on 18th of March. They cross Long Strait, then move along the Chukchi coast. The route only works because the road is not empty. Chukchi households, Russian traders, dogs, food, local boats, and local knowledge carry the message outward. The old heroic version puts Bartlett alone against the Arctic. The record gives him company. It gives him Kataktovik beside him on the ice. It gives him people along the coast who feed, house, guide, and bargain with the travelers. It gives him a rescue route made possible by knowledge that did not come from the Canadian expedition at all. By May 1914, Bartlett had reached the contact chain that could carry news outward. At Emma Harbor, Captain Pedersen's Herman picked him up and carried the news back toward Alaska. From there, he could notify Ottawa and push for rescue. The point is not to shrink Bartlett's achievement, it is to put it back inside the network that made it possible. On September 7th, the King and Winge reached the survivors on Wrangel Island. Bartlett was not there yet. In his account, he later imagines the sound of the steam whistle carrying over the water to the tent at Rogers Harbor. The rescuers came ashore with help from local indigenous walrus hunters taken aboard at East Cape. The survivors gathered their few possessions. The tents were left standing. A flag that had flown at half-mast was taken with them. Then on September 8th, Bartlett saw the King and Winge from the Bear. That is where the opening scene belongs. Not because Bartlett is the whole case, but because the deck of the King and Wing shows the cost in one glance. McKinley was there, Monroe was there, Chafe was there, Karluk, Karluk, and Mugpee were there. Malek, Mayman, and Breddy were not. The lost parties were not. The question all of you hear is powerful because the answer turns a rescue into an accounting. This is what we know. We know the Karluk was trapped in ice in 1913. We know Stefansson left with 5 others for a shore trip. We know the written instructions expected a return in about 10 days and included beacon instructions if the ship moved. We know the ship drifted west, was crushed, and sank on 11 January 1914. We know 11 people died before the survivors were rescued. This is what we do not know. No surviving source tells us the full conversation between Stefansson and Bartlett before the shore party left. That absence matters because both men later had reasons to shape the story. Stefansson had a reputation to defend. Bartlett had a rescue narrative and his own decisions after the sinking to protect. Cavell's work is useful because it refuses the easy version. Stefansson misrepresented Bartlett. Bartlett also made serious errors. Both men stood inside the same ambition for an Arctic continent. The ice does not need a motive. It moved, pressed, opened, closed, and crushed. The question belongs to the men who planned around it. One reading makes Stefansson the man who abandoned the Karluk. It is satisfying because it is simple. He left. They died. Another reading makes Bartlett the captain whose rescue march redeems the catastrophe. It is also satisfying because it gives the case a rescuer. The record does not allow either version to stand alone. Stefansson did not simply walk away from a secure ship and leave it to sink. He left on a shore trip that could be described as hunting, under conditions where he believed or claimed the ship might remain near the coast. That is the strongest case against crude polemic. But he also left written instructions that anticipated the ship moving. He remained expedition leader. His departure shifted practical command to Bartlett while preserving the appearance that the absence was temporary. And when the ship did drift away, the people aboard carried the consequences of a decision made at the edge of the ice. That is the difference. Stefansson did not abandon the Karluk in the blunt, melodramatic sense, but his orders and his absence created a situation in which abandonment could happen without anyone having to name it. So the verdict is not that 11 people died because one man simply walked away. The verdict is colder than that. The system let responsibility move slower than the ice. The missing conversation still matters, but the drift line matters more. It begins near Alaska. It slides west. It crosses the map while the written orders remain behind it, still speaking as if return were a normal expectation. The Karluk case did not begin when the hull went down in January 1914. It began when men who understood enough about the ice to fear it still allowed the expedition to behave as if command could step ashore and return unchanged. The map kept moving after Stefansson left. So did responsibility.